Moscow, 1983. The General Secretary of the Soviet Union is dying. Yuri Andropov has kidney failure. He governs from a hospital bed. He cannot walk. Some days he cannot sit upright. His generals bring him intelligence reports, and he reads them in a room that smells of antiseptic and machinery keeping him alive. The reports say the same thing every week. The Americans are preparing to strike first, not a theory, not a fear. An operational conclusion reached by KGB analysts running a program called Operation RYAN, the largest peacetime intelligence operation the Soviet Union had ever conducted, thousands of agents across Western Europe watching for signs, blood bank reserves being built up, government officials working unusual hours, military units moving without public explanation. The program had been running for 2 years, and the indicators were pointing one direction. Andropov believed Ronald Reagan wanted to win a nuclear war. Not survive one, win one. And the weapon that made that possible had just been deployed to West Germany. The Pershing II missile, range estimated by Soviet military intelligence at 2,500 kilometers, flight time to Moscow 6 minutes. 6 minutes from launch to the Kremlin being vaporized. Not enough time to scramble aircraft. Not enough time to convene leadership. Barely enough time to make a phone call. The Soviets called this scenario a decapitation strike. One precise, fast, overwhelming blow that kills the people with the authority to order retaliation before a single order can be given. The missiles fly. The leadership dies. The Soviet nuclear arsenal sits in its silos and does nothing. Because there is nobody left alive to tell it to fire. For 3 decades, the doctrine of mutually assured destruction had kept the peace. Both sides knew that attacking first meant being destroyed in return. The threat of retaliation was the lock on the cage. But a decapitation strike changed the mathematics. If you could kill the people who hold the keys before they could turn them, the threat of retaliation was no longer credible. The deterrent was gone. Andropov understood this problem from his hospital bed in 1983. His engineers had understood it since 1974, when the project began. The solution they built had a name, perimeter. The West would eventually call it dead hand. The engineers who built it described it as something that had never been attempted before in the history of warfare. A machine that could fight a nuclear war after everyone with authority to start one was already dead. Development of perimeter began in 1974 under the Scientific Research Institute of Instrument Design in Moscow, working under the Soviet Ministry of Defense. The lead engineers faced a problem that was as much philosophical as it was technical. The standard Soviet nuclear command chain required human beings at multiple levels to confirm and transmit a launch order. From the General Secretary to the Defense Minister, to the Chief of the General Staff, to the commanders of the strategic rocket forces, and down to the individual launch crews in hardened silos across the Soviet Union. Every link in that chain was a human being. And every human being could be killed by a decapitation strike in under 6 minutes. The question the engineers had to answer was this: how do you build a system that can launch the entire Soviet nuclear arsenal in retaliation when the entire command chain is dead? The answer had to satisfy conditions that pulled against each other. The system had to be capable of launching without human input, because all the humans might be dead. But it could not be fully automatic and always running, because a sensor malfunction or a natural disaster or a computer error could trigger the end of the world by accident. And it had to be survivable, meaning the sensors and computers and communication systems had to be buried deep enough and hardened enough that the initial nuclear strike that killed the command chain would not also destroy the machine designed to respond to it. They solved all 3. Perimeter entered operational service on January 23, 1985. The system is not running constantly. In peacetime, it sits dormant, a sleeping machine with its sensors disconnected and its launch authority offline. It becomes active only when a senior official, the General Secretary or the Defense Minister or the Chief of the General Staff, physically initiates it during a crisis. That decision to activate is the only human decision perimeter requires. Once activated, it begins listening. Sensors across Soviet territory, seismographs measuring ground movement, radiation detectors measuring electromagnetic output, atmospheric pressure gauges measuring the overpressure signatures of nuclear detonations. and monitoring equipment, watching military communication frequencies. The machine takes all of this in and runs it through a logic sequence. The first check: has a nuclear weapon detonated on Soviet soil? If the sensors say no, the system remains in monitoring mode. If they say yes, it moves to the second check. The second check: can the system reach the Soviet General Staff? It attempts to contact the war room. It checks the communication links. If command is reachable and responding, the system assumes living leadership exists and transfers authority back to them. It shuts itself down. Human beings will handle it from here, but if the communication links to the General Staff are dead, silence where the war room should be, then perimeter makes a conclusion. Leadership is gone. The chain of command does not exist anymore. What happens next requires no human being to decide. The third check: is enough time passing without new contact to confirm this is not a temporary communication disruption? If the silence continues beyond a threshold, ranging from 15 minutes to an hour depending on the conditions, the system moves to its final state. It transfers full launch authority to whoever is currently manning the system inside a deeply buried, hardened underground bunker. Not the General Secretary, not the Defense Minister, not the Chief of the General Staff. All of them are dead. 3 people in a bunker. That is the human element perimeter retained, not to give them control of the decision. The decision has already been made by the machine. Their role is to confirm that the machine's logic is correct, that what they are seeing in front of them is consistent with what the sensors are reporting, and then to do one thing: authorize the command rockets. The command rockets are perimeter's most specific engineering achievement. They are modified intercontinental ballistic missiles, not armed with nuclear warheads, armed with radio transmitters. When launched from their hardened silos, they fly in a programmed arc across the entire territory of the Soviet Union, broadcasting a single signal on military frequencies. That signal is the authorization code for every nuclear missile in the Soviet arsenal, every silo, every submarine within range of the broadcast, every mobile launcher that has survived the initial strike. They do not need to receive a human order. They receive a radio signal from a missile flying overhead. That is enough. The entire Soviet nuclear response to a decapitation strike is therefore this: sensors detect the attack, system checks for surviving command. Command is gone. 3 people in a bunker confirm what the machine is already telling them. Command rockets launch. Command rockets fly across Soviet territory broadcasting the authorization. Everything that can still be fired, fires. From the moment the sensors confirm the attack to the moment the first retaliatory warheads are in the air, somewhere between 15 minutes and 1 hour. The Americans who learned of perimeter in the early 1990s, when a retired Soviet general walked into a press briefing in Moscow and described the system as an open secret, had a specific reaction: disbelief, then horror, then a question nobody had asked before. Why did the Soviets not tell us? The deterrent value of a doomsday machine depends entirely on the other side knowing it exists. If you build a machine that guarantees your retaliation after a first strike and then keep it classified, the first strike still looks survivable to the attacker. The Americans had not known perimeter existed, which meant their deterrence calculations for a decade had been based on a threat they did not know was there. When the question was put to Valery Yarinich, one of Perimeter's chief designers, in a 1999 interview, his answer was precise. He said the Soviet leadership was afraid that if the Americans knew the system existed, they would accelerate their first strike capability to destroy it before it could be used. Keeping it secret was itself a strategic decision. The machine that guaranteed retaliation was kept hidden from the people it was supposed to deter. This is the central irony of Perimeter, a doomsday machine whose existence was classified, a deterrent that did not deter because the adversary did not know it was there. But there is a second irony, one that the designers understood from the beginning and built into the system deliberately. Yarinich described this in the same interview. He said that Perimeter was not only designed to guarantee retaliation, it was designed to slow down the decision. In a crisis, the Soviet leadership faced a specific pressure. Their early warning systems might report incoming missiles. The report might be accurate. It might be a malfunction. They would have minutes to decide. The pressure to launch immediately before their own missiles were destroyed in their silos was enormous, and the consequences of launching on a false alarm were the same as the consequences of launching on a real one. Perimeter removed that pressure. A Soviet leader who activated the system could then wait. The machine would handle retaliation if the attack was real. There was no longer any need to decide within 6 minutes. The leader could take time to verify whether the attack was genuine before issuing any order at all, because the machine had already guaranteed that the response would happen regardless. Yarinich said this was Perimeter's true purpose, not a doomsday machine, a buffer against panic. If you are finding this examination of Soviet weapons engineering of interest, subscribing to the channel helps ensure you do not miss the next one. In November of 1983, NATO conducted a military exercise called Able Archer 83. It was a simulation of NATO's nuclear release procedures involving heads of state, radio silences, and a simulated transition to DEF-CON1. The exercise was realistic enough that Soviet intelligence monitoring it could not determine with certainty whether it was a simulation or the real thing. Soviet nuclear forces in East Germany and Poland were placed on alert. Aircraft were armed, units were moved. The Soviet military was preparing to respond to what they believed might be an actual American nuclear attack. At this moment, in a hospital in Moscow, Andropov was lying in a bed with his kidneys failing, watching intelligence reports describe a NATO exercise that looked exactly like the early stages of a first strike. Perimeter was not yet operational. It would come online 14 months later. But the decision that created it had already been made. The engineers were already building it, because the scenario that made it necessary was not a theoretical one. It was November 1983, and the Soviet Union was watching what looked like the beginning of the end, and the man with the authority to respond was dying in a hospital room and could not be sure it was not real. Perimeter became operational in January 1985. Andropov died in February 1984. He never saw it finished. The system has been operational continuously since 1985. After the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, it was inherited by the Russian Federation along with the rest of the Soviet nuclear arsenal. In 2011, the commander of the Russian Strategic Missile Forces, Sergei Karakayev, confirmed in a public interview that Perimeter was still active and had been modernized. He did not specify what the modernizations involved. He said the system still functioned as intended. That means the following is true today. Somewhere in Russia, a network of seismic sensors is monitoring the ground. Radiation detectors are measuring the electromagnetic environment. Atmospheric pressure gauges are watching for the overpressure signatures of nuclear detonations. Communications monitoring equipment is listening on military frequencies. The sensors feed into a computing system inside a hardened underground facility built to survive a direct nuclear strike. The system is dormant. It is not activated, but it is maintained. It is tested. The people who operate it know how it works and what it does when it is switched on. They know that if a Russian official activates Perimeter in a crisis, and then that official is killed, and the communications links to the general staff go silent, the machine will reach a conclusion without asking anyone, and 3 people in a bunker will have a question to answer. The designers describe this as a buffer against panic, a guarantee against a hasty decision made under impossible pressure, a way of ensuring that the response to a nuclear attack would happen even after everyone with the authority to order it was dead. What it is, in terms the engineers chose not to use, is this: a machine with a conditional instruction to end the world. The condition can be met by a nuclear attack. It can theoretically be met by a sufficiently large conventional explosion in the right location. It can theoretically be met by a natural disaster that produces the right sensor readings combined with a simultaneous communication failure. The designers built in safeguards, multiple sensor types, cross-checking logic, human confirmation in the bunker before the command rockets fly. The system was not designed to be triggered by a mistake, but the 1983 war scare happened because a NATO exercise designed to simulate a nuclear attack looked, to Soviet sensors and analysts, like a nuclear attack. The perimeter sensors that would have been watching in 1983 were not yet connected to the system. By 1985, they were. Yarinich was asked in his final interview, published in 2009, whether he believed perimeter was still a good idea. He said the logic of mutually assured destruction made it rational. He said the alternative, a world in which a decapitation strike eliminated the threat of retaliation, was more dangerous than the machine he had built. Then he said something that the interviewer noted he seemed to have been thinking about for a long time. He said he hoped nobody ever had to find out whether it worked. Yaranich died in 2013. He spent his career building a machine designed to function after everyone was dead, and the rest of his life hoping it never would. The machine is still running.